Hello, and welcome to the Yes You May live stream podcast where we talk all about how you can give yourself permission to tackle your own life and live it to its fullest ability. Today, I have a good friend of mine on. Her name is Vivian Cobb, and she told me something interesting recently that made me go, "Oh, we need to talk about that further." So save it for the podcast. So, without further ado, here is my friend Vivian Cobb to talk to us about how crying can help you. Hi, Vivian. How are you?
Hi, Amanda May. I'm doing fantastic.
Thank
Thank
you
you
for
so much
coming
for
on.
having me. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, you said that crying can actually be more beneficial than laughter, and I was like, "Stop everything. I need to know more, but don't tell me now because I think other people need to know this too." So, without wasting any more time because I just dive into things. Tell me a little bit more about this. Like, how did you find out that crying was more beneficial? Is beneficial? Like, give me the details because I need to know.
You need the deets,
I
huh?
do. I need the deets.
Okay. Well, it's a little bit of a sad story, of
Oh,
course, it involves crying.
true. Okay, that's fair. I should have expected that.
Yeah, should have. 10 years ago, I lost my husband to
Oh,
cancer. And I also simultaneously lost my house and my financial security. I mean,
sure.
all of it went at the same time because he failed to mention that we were in foreclosure before he died.
Oh,
Yeah, so it was a very traumatic time, as you can imagine, for
yeah.
me to have that much loss, and it's considered compound loss because you lose many things at the same time.
Oh,
And it was a mess. The state was a mess. There were a lot of creditors breathing down my neck. And so I had a lot to deal with on top of my grief for losing him. And I kind of set that aside a little bit because
sure.
I
Yeah.
was I was in survival mode. I was trying to deal with all this stuff coming down on me. And I, of course, went into therapy. I needed a little support at the time. And my therapist told me that I needed to cry, and I was crying. Well, let me back up. I was crying all the time.
Sure.
I would go to the grocery store and I'd burst out crying. I would go,
Aw.
and I was embarrassed and I was horrified, and I just could not keep the tears from flowing. I mean, I had a lot to cry about, and I would try to keep it all in, but there was just too much, and it was just.
Right.
And my therapist said, "No, that's what you need to be doing." I was like, I'm mortified. I'm embarrassed." And she's like, "No, you need to cry
Huh.
as much as you can cry." And once I got that through my head and I
Yeah.
started to allow that to happen, it helped me so much. And I actually started doing research about it.
Right. Because that's what
And
we
that's
do.
when I found out that, contrary to popular belief, and although laughing is great medicine, it is not the best medicine.
Hmm.
It's actually crying that helps us purge our emotions out of our body, but it also helps us purge toxins out of our bodies. Our tears actually have different chemical compositions depending on what we're crying about. Like if we have happy tears versus really sad or traumatized tears, there's different uh, chemicals in our tears that are releasing out of our bodies. So it is our body's natural way of purging.
No kidding.
And the tragedy here is that we are taught at a very young
Mhm.
age to not cry.
Right.
And I am an emotions advocate now. That's part of what I do and what I speak about. And this has come about because of this. And especially for our men, our little boys, that we
Yeah.
are like, suck it up, you're a man, don't cry. All of that negativity creates people to suppress their tears. And that's actually really bad for us. It's a very natural process. And yet we're taught not to do it. And so I'm out there. My mission is to let everybody know that no, you should be crying. And when I was in the thick of it, and I did this for years, instead of suppressing my tears, I turned it into an exercise, almost a daily thing that I would do if I felt like I needed to cry. And you know how sometimes you get those feelings of, oh, I need to cry, but I can't, or I
Mhm.
better not, or I don't have time. I would set a timer for 15 minutes, and I would put on the song that I knew would make me cry, or the movie that I knew would make me cry, and I would sit there for 15 minutes and just bawl my eyes out, boo-hoo it. And then when the timer was up, it was like, "Okay, done. I'll get on with my day." And that way, I wasn't caught by surprise when the tears would come. I actually helped them purge. And I truly believe that that practice was what helped me heal from all the pain and grief that I was in. So it's kind of a crying party almost. And people are very uncomfortable with that because, again, we've
Yeah.
been taught crying is a bad thing, but it's really, really not. So I encourage you and your listeners to take the opportunity when it arises to go with it, dive into those tears and let them flow. It's really, really good for you.
That is so crazy because we always think of it as weak or, "Oh, I shouldn't do this," and I feel like often it's an apology, right? In terms of if somebody else sees us do it, we instantly, for I would say the majority of us, we feel the need to apologize. "Oh, I'm
Exactly.
sorry. Oh, I try," and stop ourselves, right? Like we try to stop ourselves, we try to hide our faces, we try to run away from it and apologize for it even happening because there's this implicit thing within society, I would say across most of societies, like not just the American one, but I would think that that's a pretty commonplace thing, is that it's not okay and that we should not do it and we should be apologetic about it.
Exactly. And yet we
What?
don't apologize when we start to laugh, do we?
No, never. Actually, I do sometimes because I can get loud, but that's
Or
that's
when it's
another story.
it's like, "Oops, I shouldn't be laughing right now, sorry."
I also do that too. Yeah. Sometimes I'm like, oh, that was probably inappropriate, or I like turn things into something trying to be a joke. That doesn't
Yeah.
always go well. Oops.
True. However,
Oops.
but you're right, and I actually talk about that in my speeches, and I bring up that very point that people apologize immediately when they start to cry, and it's because we know that the people we are with are uncomfortable with our crying.
Right.
And that's got to change. Everybody needs to be comfortable with crying. And if you're around people who aren't comfortable with you crying, maybe you're around the wrong people. That's kind of where I've come down. We should be free to be who we are when we are and do what we need to do. And a lot of that is be able to express our emotions, and of course appropriately. I mean, you
Of
don't want to
course.
go running amok, but there there has to be a a situation where we can all be comfortable around our emotions. And crying, like I said, is so important, and it's how we really connect. And have you
Yeah.
noticed when you cry or when you see somebody crying, you have those feelings as well, you kind of join in with. I
Right.
have a really hard time being around people who are crying because I want to cry too. And I have now given myself permission to cry too if I need to. So that's really important.
Well, I like the give yourself permission, and I want to come back to that. But you mentioned something. How do we create the safe space? How do we make that change in society? And not just, if they're not allowed to cry, but how do we actively try to make it okay for ourselves to cry, to have other people cry, to encourage that, I guess is the word that I'm looking for. What can we do as a society to make that better.
Well, we need to start young. I mean, when you think about it, crying is literally the first thing we do when we pop out of our mothers.
That's true. I hadn't even thought about that.
Yeah, that's how natural a response it is to life.
Yeah,
And we need to change our mindset around crying and the importance of crying. I believe we have to start with our children and allowing them and not saying something to them like, if you don't stop crying, I'll give you something to cry about. How many
yeah,
times have
that's
you
not
heard that, right? That's like the absolute worst thing we can say to our
that's
children. We need to say, it's okay to cry, express yourself and be comforting and nurturing and let them know it's okay to do that. And again, especially our boys, because men die younger than us, and that's because
true.
they stuff their emotions all of their entire lives. So if we could change that at a very early age and have a culture of self-expression and acceptance of our feelings, and crying is part of that, and then getting in touch with our own biases around crying, for the older generation. I mean, it took a lot for me to change my view about crying, because I too was brought up in a culture and a society where it was looked at as a negative thing. And yet, after doing all the research I've done, it's the absolute opposite. So, education,
Yeah.
uh, and learning to be comfortable with it in yourself so you can be comfortable in it when others do the same thing around you, and you can be comforting for them.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to giving yourself permission
Mhm.
and then making that permission known, especially to your kids, right? Like if you have kids, encouraging that like it's okay to cry, you know, maybe not forever and indefinitely. It's
Right.
okay to laugh, but it isn't a negative for long periods of time. Do you
Mhm.
think there is a certain amount of crying that we can do or that we should do? Or do you think just as much as we want? Or is there like a sweet spot? Like you mentioned the 15 minutes. Is there a sweet spot to get it out and move on?
Uh, I think that's gonna be within each individual, of course, but
Sure.
you're right. If you are crying incessantly all day long, then there's probably a problem, and you probably need to get professional help. Uh, that's, but you're gonna know that within yourself. But we don't put a limit on laughing, so let's not put a limit on crying either. If you need to cry, you need to cry. And I found that once I know for me, my fear when I was in the thick of all of that, I had so much pain inside of me. I was afraid if I started crying, I would never stop. I mean, that's
Right.
how it felt. But of course, that's not true. When you cry and you get it out of your system, you actually feel relief.
Yeah.
Endorphins are released, just like in laughing. You actually feel better afterward. But
Hmm.
like all of our emotions, they come in waves. So
Yes.
you're going to have a crying spout, you might have a laughing bout, and then, it'll come back. Just be with it. And a lot of times it takes self-reflection. It's like, okay, well, why am I sad right now? Why am I feeling
Mm,
this depth of sorrow in me that I have to express it this way? And maybe self reflect on that. See if you're triggered in some way. Something may have happened in your life that has caused this sadness that's deep inside of you. And you might want to look at that. You want to purge it, of course, but
right.
I'm all about self reflection and mindfulness and awareness and looking at why we do what we do. Uh,
Yeah.
but in the moment of sorry about that. In the moment of the crying, just go with it. Just let
Yeah.
it flow, and then maybe reflect on it after you're finished. But the truth is, you will stop crying eventually. You really will. So don't be afraid, I guess is my message there.
That is a good point. I mean, at some point, we've all heard that saying, like, "You'll cry yourself to sleep," right? And it's literally something when you have babies, you're like, "Just let them cry themselves back to sleep." And it will happen. It will eventually stop. And to your point, like, acknowledging that and being aware of it in advance, it's almost like anything else, right? Like, when you set the expectations beforehand, the outcome is that much better. You also said you release endorphins when you cry.
Mhm.
And I never really put that together, but I have identified in the past that I felt better after crying, and it was almost like I don't know why I got so upset. I don't know why I felt that strongly, and I don't know why I got that worked up, and
Mhm.
yet after crying, I felt so much better, and that's what came afterwards. I was like, "I don't know why that bothered me so much. It really wasn't that bad now that I'm looking at it." But that only tends to happen swiftly post crying, because when you hold it in and you bottle it in, that's when, well, that's when you can explode. Like, on somebody else. I mean, like,
Mhm.
you can just let things build too much, and then it all comes out at once,
Mhm.
instead of just working through it and allowing your body to process.
Mhm. And that's exactly why I'm an emotions advocate right there.
I think that's so cool.
I'm all about helping people understand how important it is to process, embrace all emotions, even the sad ones, even the ones we think aren't great, our fear, our anger, our angst, our sadness, our sorrow. Those are all just as important as our happy emotions that bring us joy and laughter, and we need all of it to be
We do.
complete human beings. And I love what you said there. Absolutely, it's all about processing and working our way through it, because stuff is going to happen.
Yeah.
And like I said, we're going to be triggered. We're going to be disappointed. We're going to be surprised. All the emotions, all of it. And we need to know what to do with it, as opposed to suppressing them, stuffing them, running from them, numbing them, which is the worst. But again, a society that encourages that. Go to the bar, have a drink,
Right.
everything will be fine.
I was just thinking, alcohol, alcohol, alcohol. It is such a prevailing thing, and yet it's a depressant. So,
Mhm,
like, when you're already down and you drink alcohol, it gives you that, it's almost like a burst of caffeine instantaneously, but then you're just like, "Ooh."
right.
And one thing I noticed actually with alcohol, as I got older, my hangovers turned from, like, I'm not feeling well the next day to I'm depressed all day long.
Mm.
And that doesn't help at all. And that's something that I remind myself of now. It's like, "Nah, I don't need a drink because I don't wanna feel terrible the next day."
There you go. Yeah. It's much healthier to process
Yeah.
your emotions. And yes, it's hard at times, but it's worth the journey. I That's what I found through my story. It is definitely worth the journey, because if we deal with the lower, and it's all energy, right? And the
Mhm.
lower vibration emotions like sorrow, if we deal with those, then it actually elevates our happier emotions. And
Yes.
and like I talk about, you can't have day without night, night without
You
day.
you
So
can't.
you can't have the good without the bad, or the bad without the good. You can't have light without darkness. And so it's okay. Give yourself permission to go into the darkness, go into the pain, process it, and then when you get through it, the light, whew, feels even better. It's like, wow. Yeah. That's our natural ability. And we have somewhere along the way, we got really messed up on that.
Well, that doesn't surprise me that much.
So my mission as an emotions advocate and a speaker, inspirational speaker, is to go out there and spread this message to people so that they can change their mindset about their emotions and how important they all are, not just the good ones, all of them.
All of
And that
them.
and we need to embrace all of them. We need to embrace the crying just as much as the laughing.
Just as much. I think that is brilliant. It's interesting because last week, at one of my meetings, one of my friends, his name is Coach Joe Sasho. I was trying to find the exact quote to quote him because he said it so eloquently. He was asked a question about, looking on the bright side of things, and I'm gonna paraphrase, and I will find the exact quote because it was very good. He said, "You can't. I don't think you can." What did he say? I don't think you can enjoy the bright side without being on the dark side at some point.
Mhm.
But it was reversed, and it was so much more eloquent than what I just said, and he just, like, said it, and I was like, "You gotta write that somebody write it down," and clearly, I didn't do a good job at it, but you bring up a good point, like, to really be able to appreciate the laughter, the fun, the good times, you have to have that dichotomy, which is the human experience, which is why we are here in the first place, is to experience the roller coaster and have the fun with it, and
Mhm.
to feel the ups, to feel the downs, and to allow ourselves to appreciate both
Mhm.
instead of be shamed, be,
Be afraid.
judged. Yeah,
Mhm.
and have a good time with it. In the speaking world, they say that if you're gonna make somebody feel sad or cry, you have to find a way to bring them back up afterwards. What are your thoughts on that?
I would agree with that. As a speaker, I definitely work really hard. I know my story is hard to listen to, and I go into much further detail usually on in my keynote than I have here. And my audience is 100% of the time there'll be somebody in my audience who's crying with me.
Mm,
I'm not afraid to cry while I'm speaking. I still, even 10 years later, cannot tell that story without getting emotional and crying, because it was such a huge, huge upset in my life, and I've worked through it, but that pain is always going to be somewhere in there. And when I talk about it, I bring it to the forefront, which helps me connect with my audience. And so they're crying too. But I'm also very careful to be light and, like you said, bring them back up. You don't want to leave them down in the dumps.
right.
Kind of like a sad movie. We want that happy ending after the we need it. And the happy ending, of course, is that I've moved on in my life. I'm now living a passion that I've dreamed about since I was 16. I mean, my life would not be this life had my husband stayed alive. So I have to look at, and again, there's
Right.
the duality that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Uh, Even though it was a very tragic event, I have to, in order to continue with my life and enjoy my life, I have to look at the bright side of that really tragic event. And so that's what I bring to my audiences, and that's what inspires them eventually. Yeah,
Do you think that in every tragedy, there is always something to be learned and learned in a positive light? Something
absolutely.
positive that comes out?
I absolutely do. And I know that sounds, there's been some really horrific things that have happened in our world,
True.
and especially lately. Um, but yes, we ha we have to look at it that way, because if we don't, then we would all go slash our wrists, I guess. I mean, we have to have that hope, right? We have to have something to glean out of the tragedies that happen. I mean, like even the Holocaust, there are so many incredible stories of
Oh, yeah.
courage and magnificence, out of that horrific tragedy. And yeah, it takes a little work sometimes to find it. But absolutely, I do. I do. I believe that there is a silver lining to everything if we take the time to look for it.
I think that's the key too, is the taking the time to look for it, and I think that's one of the vital lessons here, right? you have to take the time to look for it. It's your own responsibility, and not for others, but for yourself to see, because in my opinion, you really learn after you reflect.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
you learn while doing, but then you learn reflecting on what happened, whether the outcome was what you wanted, or you didn't want. It still was a process for you to be able to learn from, to glean knowledge for somebody else, to improve, obviously depending on the situation, what we're talking about, but you just never know what you're going to get out of it. And I always say that, like, our life is not linear. We tend to think like we're going to be on this linear path and everything should just go like this, when in reality, we take all these zigs and zags, just like hiking a mountain. You never just hike straight up, right? The trail always winds around, and you can't stop halfway through a trail on a hike. Like, you either have to keep going up or you have to turn around and come back down, but you can't just stay still.
Mhm.
And all those things are preparing you for what is to come. Without those things, where you're at now wouldn't be. So, like, even with my own self journey, I see, like, okay, had I not gone through bad relationship after bad relationship with mounds of debt and yada yada, I wouldn't have gotten fed up with myself, moved to Atlanta, and started everything over again. But I also wouldn't have made the friends along the way, and I wouldn't have learned the skills on how to improve my credit, how to get better, how to pay things off, how to make money when you had to. And all of those things help. All of them make a difference and make you who you are. And
Absolutely.
without them, like, wouldn't it be boring?
It would be. And we all know this. We know this, we forget it, but we all know that we learn in our times of adversity. When we're happy and everything's going fabulous, we
Yeah,
don't stop and say, "Oh, why am I happy right now? I should." No, we're like,
we
"Yes,
shouldn't anyway.
I'm happy, and I'm so happy that I'm happy." And that's what we should do. But when we're down, like you said, and we're going through our challenges and our lessons, that's where our lessons are. And I always say our lessons are at the other side of our pain. And we've got to
Mm.
go through it.
Oh, I like
And
that one.
then we learn so much. We grow. And if you ask me, that's why, like you said earlier, that's why we're here. That's
Yeah.
the meaning of life. We are here to learn. And our lessons are in our adversity. And we need to take time to reflect. We need to take time to cry. We need to take time to feel all of it. And it's not easy.
It's not easy. It's not easy. It's funny because I've been listening.
Easy. And nobody, this whole idea that life is easy, it's not.
It's not meant to be easy. It's meant to
Not
be
meant
a
to be.
journey. So
Yes.
I've been listening to, I don't know if you're familiar with Abraham Hicks a lot.
Mhm.
Talks a lot about manifestation, law of attraction, feeling, the vortex, all the things, the inner beings. And one thing that I find really interesting that's really hit home recently, and I've been trying to remind myself more and more of, is like, when you ask for something, when you want something, and it immediately appears, that is not as satisfying as the journey to get to what you want.
I love
You
that.
wouldn't want to eat all the food that you're ever going to eat and never eat again. There is enjoyment, and there is satisfaction in figuring things out, in going on that journey. The reward for a hike is the beautiful view at the top, but you don't just drive to the top and say, "Oh, this is beautiful." When you hike it and you're sweating and you're out of breath and your dog is pulling you up the hill because he sets the pace. Let's be honest, my dog sets the pace, bless his sweet little face, but he does. People are always like, "You hike very fast." I'm like, "No, it's the dog." I don't choose. But anyways, I'm gonna sidetrack here. I so much more enjoy at the top. I'm just like so proud of myself. I enjoyed the experience. I enjoyed the time to, think. And when I am working on my website, right, or on my business, my podcast, I remind myself lately, I don't just instantly want everything to be done, because I thoroughly enjoy solving the problem and going on that journey. And too often, especially in the society, and I think it's something that we need to actively work to combat for the younger generations, is this instant gratification,
Mhm.
because it's just not as fulfilling.
And
It's
it's
just
not,
not.
And it's not reality.
And then
It's
there's that.
not reality.
And plus, it's not going to happen your whole life. Like, you got to work for things. But I think they have this, and I only know because I've got 3 of them in my life. They have this instant gratification that has never been around for any generation in the past.
Mhm.
And it's I just feel like they don't get to experience and enjoy things as much because there is this certain element that, like, going through that journey is worth it. Okay, that's
I
it. That's what I got.
I agree with you, girl. You got it. Spot
That's
on.
my tangent. That's it. I'm done. Uh, Vivian, I realize it's now 30 minutes in, so we are right there where I wanted to keep you at, and not force you to talk to me all day long. Although I feel like we could totally talk all day long.
Good. I didn't think so. We'll have
Totally
to do this
possible.
again. What do you say?
But thank you for coming on. If the people want to get in touch with you, Miss Vivian, where would they find you? What's the best place to reach out to you, to learn
Uh,
more, to follow along on your journey of
sure.
crying?
Well, I'm of course on all the places, LinkedIn and whatever, but probably the fastest, most direct way would be to go to my website, to my contact page, and that would be viviancobbspeaking.com.
Ta-da!
Easy peasy.
Super,
And then
super easy.
contact button, and boom, there I will be.
Ta-da! I'm here.
Yes. How may I help you?
That's awesome. Well, thank you for coming on. I do appreciate it. And if you guys liked what Vivian had to say, we'll have her links in the show notes as well. Check her out. She's a good friend of mine. And be sure to continue following around because someday you might see Vivian and I in person doing something together. In like the next month. I don't know. Something might be happening. Something somewhere might be happening.
Something somewhere.
Don't tell our mentor and good friend that we might dive bomb him though. I don't know if I don't think he knows what he's gotten himself into is all I'm gonna say there.
No, not at all.
But it's gonna be a great time.
This was an absolute pleasure, Amanda May. Thank you so much for having me, and hopefully I will come back someday. We
I
can
would
visit.
love that. I
Okay.
know, I keep, like, compiling people. I'm like, "Well, I should definitely have more people on, but I liked that conversation. We should do it again."
Well,
It's
I'm
so
here for
fun.
you, girl. All right.
I appreciate it. Thank you for coming, and as always, thank you for watching the Yes You May or listening to the Yes You May live stream podcast here every Tuesday and wherever you might enjoy podcasts. Thank you so much. I hope everybody has a beautiful, positive day where you've learned to give yourself permission. Bye now.
Bye.